Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. Governor Mario Cuomo always said that you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. President-elect Barack Obama, whose election set off an explosion of joy in this most democratic of cities, now faces the sobering task of leading a nation divided by war and beset by an economic calamity unseen since the 1930s. Obama comes to office with a strong hand, but bad cards, if you'll pardon a metaphor with its own contradictions. As George W. Bush's presidency limps to its close, Obama is sitting in Chicago working on policies he will try to push quickly after January 20th to take advantage of that period of time when his political capital is highest. He's talking about a major fiscal stimulus, especially in the area of job-creating infrastructure investment that could greatly benefit aging cities like New York and areas like transit improvements and even the construction of a cross-harbor freight tunnel that has been on the design table since 1923. He wants to use the financial strength of the federal government not only to help the auto industry get back on its feet, but leverage that offer of help with requirements that will force the industry to improve gas mileage and enhance the goal of an economic future that highlights environmentally friendly green development. The fiscal realities, however, that are hamstringing him are also running up against a decade or more of pent-up frustration among progressive forces, including leading Democratic senators and House members. They hope that Obama will tackle problems such as universal health care that too often in the past have remained stuck in campaign rhetoric instead of government action. One of our panelists tonight recently wrote in The Nation magazine that now is the time for those progressives to push hard and push smart against those who will be counseling Obama to go slowly. Much the same as organized labor and other forces pushed Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the left after a 1932 campaign in which the New Deal president actually ran on a promise of a balanced budget, that's what Obama is going to be facing. Obama knows that he owes his election as the nation's first African-American president to strong support from progressive white voters and Latinos, as well as black voters. But it was moderate and even conservative white voters who, buffeted by the economy, saw beyond race and opted for a new generation of leadership that made his election possible. So what does the ascension of Barack Obama mean for us? We're joined by four prominent New Yorkers to try and figure out what it all means. Richard Flanagan is professor of political science at the College of Staten Island. Erica Gonzalez is the editorial page editor of El Diario. Chayuka Cornelius is the lead political organizer for Local 32 BJ of the Service Employees International Union. And Frances Fox Piven is distinguished professor of political science at the CUNY Graduate Center. Frances, let me start with you. Obama is going to be caught in a contest between those who want to push him to be more progressive, as a lot of his supporters were, and those who are going to try to use the economic crisis to pull him back.
Well, they won't just use the economic crisis to pull him back. You know, you've got to be realistic. Obama is a politician, a very talented politician, and I'm just filled with joy that he won, but he's a politician. That means he's going to try to deal with and appease the political forces that are important in Washington, and that includes the Wall Street interests who are eating the bailout funds. It includes big corporate lobbyists. It includes Blue Dog Democrats. It includes Wall Street Democrats. That's what he'll do if everything is smooth for him. So it stands to reason that unless the ordinary people, working people, progressives, poor people, who actually put him in office with their votes, unless they exert pressure on him, he'll tilt toward the powerful. You can already see it. He's brought all the Clintonites into the transition and into his administration. Now, I like Clintonites better than I like Bushies, but we hope for more from an Obama administration.
Erica, she talked about pressure on issues. Obviously, Latinos voted far more strongly for Obama than they did for Bush 4 years ago, and kind of even Cuban Americans who were the most Republican of Latino groups gave very large, I don't think it was a majority, but large votes to Obama. Issues like immigration, issues that have been on the back burner. I mean, is there renewed pressure to solve those issues now? What kind of pressure you see coming on Obama?
Well, you know, there was a specific commitment to pushing forward immigration reform. And what we saw during the Democratic primaries, Republican primaries, is that immigration reform was a hot topic, and then it tapered off and sort of disappeared. But it's right at the forefront of the minds of immigration advocates, of Latino organizations, national organizations, leaders of which sat down with Obama and made sure that he knew that this was a top priority. And the conversation that's happening among organizations that have pushed immigration reform is sort of, how do we proceed? Do we try to go for some one sort of comprehensive bill, or do we do this piecemeal? Do we bring the DREAM Act forward? Do we bring a series of measures forward? So the expectation is that immigration reform, whatever strategy that it's brought to the table, that it's going to be brought forward, that it needs to be brought forward, and you won't see the same results with Hispanic voters that in the next election if it's not resolved.
Chiuka, you worked on the campaign. You do a lot of political work for your union, and you're also, I think you're a young man. You're a young African American man, and Obama has the degree to which I happen to believe this was also largely a generational election, but identity politics is always a big piece of this. What's this done in the street? What did you see? You were in Ohio and other places like that.
Right. Well, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a large cultural and social impact that people really haven't talked about yet. I mean, there's been this looming question both in city and state level about how do you get to that young, angry black man who's dropped out, who's selling drugs, who speaks Ebonics. There's this whole Ebonics thing. And, you know, Obama has shown that there's a reason to speak the King's English, and that's because you can be king, you know, and I think there's a reason to pull up your pants. It's, you know, it's going to be cool to be black again, and not just the Elvis Presley black acting black. It's going to be cool to be black, you know, and there's a real difference there. You know, for a long time it wasn't cool to be black. You know, it was okay, but it wasn't cool. And I think it's going to be cool to be black again. It's going to be cool to speak the King's English. It's going to be cool to pull up your pants and wear a tie and understand things. And I think that's going to have a spillover into the mainstream community more than people really thought about.
Richard, let me. I was talking to a friend in Albany who said that especially since you look at a lot at state government as well, that for liberals, for progressives, this is like the dog who chased the bus and all of a sudden caught the bus, and now what do you do? Right. So, unlike the federal government, which can print money and run a deficit, we can't do that in the city and the state. And so it seems like we're more hamstrung at what we can do than they can do on a federal level.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a sense we are, but if this $500 billion fiscal package comes out of Washington, a big chunk of it will have to be distributed to the states, because giving some of that money back to the states to prop up social, education, health programs is probably the best way to jumpstart the economy. And it's certain that they're thinking about 4 years from now, and they need an economic recovery time for the next presidential election. They probably like an economic recovery time for the midterms. So that's probably the fastest way to go.
Francis, the question is how big that package will be. We do need a fiscal stimulus package. Giving it to the states and localities is one way to get the funds out that will stimulate the economy, that will create jobs, and will create needed public infrastructure. Because the states and localities are really starving for funds. Necessary services, necessary capital investments can probably be best implemented by them and quickly. But it has to be big. It really has to be big to have an impact on an economy that is so constricted, that is in so much trouble as this economy is now. And, there are going to be a lot of other pressures on Obama. Is he really going to pull the troops out of Iraq? How much is he going to invest in unemployment insurance and restoring federal services like the S-CHIP program, Medicaid program? Is he going to put money into the housing market? Is he going to call for and push for a moratorium on foreclosures? Those things are going to be very hard to do because there will be powerful opposition to doing them. And that's one of the reasons that it's important that the people who need that kind of stimulus package, that kind of recovery, begin to exert pressure on Obama.
To what degree is Obama get a bit of a free ride? I mean, you know, because you do have people who want to pressure Obama for just the kinds of things Francis is talking about, but at the same time, they don't want to undercut him politically. I mean, it's a very interesting calculus of political factors. I want to ask you as well. I mean,
it's that first 100 days that you have, and I think he's got to focus on his priorities. He's got to focus on bringing some of those campaign promises home. He's got to. I mean, I think if you're going to deal with the car manufacturing issue and the economic stimulus, you've got to say, look, we've got to do something about people whose credit ratings were screwed as a result of what happened. You know, we're bailing out all these companies with the tune of billions. We got to help people with their credit rating. We have got to do something about health care. And I think he's got to use those first 100 days and articulate his priorities early and clearly and go for them and be aggressive. And I think by doing that, by being the politician that he is, as Francis says, he can use that to his benefit and get something good out of it.
I mean, do you think he's, I mean, how quickly does he have to move?
He has to move very quickly, and I do think that he's going to have some slack cut because people realize the extent of the mess that we're in so many areas. We actually have a series, El Diario has a series running where we have experts sort of spell out the picture for Latinos in different policy areas, health insurance, poverty, et cetera, and all of these questions that were inadequately addressed for the past 8 years and inadequately addressed before. So I agree with Chiuka that the housing crisis is one of the first and foremost crises that he has to lay out a plan for. Latinos and African Americans are disproportionately affected by subprime loan, the foreclosure crisis. I think we get sort of a monthly update about how Queens is faring the worst in terms of foreclosure in New York City. So and how all of those issues tie into earnings, to homelessness, to a number of other problems. So that's the first and foremost. But I also think that with other issues, I mean, there were organizations like campaigns like Code Pink that said that they were going to be exerting pressure and not take a pause on that with respect to getting a troop withdrawal from Iraq. So you're right, you have to sort of temper, and there is going to be that inevitable sort of the slack that he's given because of the extent, the massive sort of hemorrhaging that's happening all over the place.
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, you know, but I'm a little concerned right out of the gate because he's governing like Clinton, and there's no reason to govern like Clinton. When Clinton was elected in '92, he had, for all of his mistakes, he had the pressure of the Ross Perot voters, and 20% of the electorate followed Perot, and wanted deficit reduction. So right out of the gate, Clinton adopted right of center policies. And never really recovered from that. And Obama has brought back the Clintons. And the idea of hiring Hillary Clinton as your Secretary of State, one of the most hawkish Democrats in the coalition, is astounding. So I'm pretty troubled. I mean, he has a moment to be his generation's LBJ.
Well, he's also a student not only of Roosevelt, but he's also a student of Lincoln. The idea of you keep your friends close and your enemies closer, in the sense of bringing them. There's a reason. The general assumption, and I'm not sure that she is ultimately going to get this nomination. Is that it demonstrates, that he is appealing to different audiences with different appointments. And when you appeal to the world, this is a woman who is probably the best known American woman in the world. So, I mean, I think there's tremendous value in naming her. Plus, it allows those of us who deal in political gossip to have to deal with who's going to replace her, which we can lunch on for a long time.
Yeah. He didn't have to have mainly Clintonites on his transition team. It wasn't that he was keeping his enemies close so as to keep an eye on them. He was turning to Clinton people for advice. They were going to staff the new administration. That's a different thing. Look, there's no reason to think Barack Obama is a lefty.
I agree with you.
He isn't a lefty. Some people perceive Hillary Clinton as a lefty. No, well, I mean, you can say whatever you want.
Well, there's a Rashomon quality to the, people see things differently. They see the same person in different ways.
Well, the same person changes. My point is that, yes, there are strands of progressivism visible in Barack Obama's career and in his rhetoric and even in his program. And those are the strands that we should try to activate. But we won't do that by wishing it to be so. I think there has to be a real popular mobilization.
But let me ask you the same question I asked Chiuka. Is the nature of the coalition that elected him, are they so invested in him that they're hamstrung in trying to pressure him?
By the coalition, you mean the voters?
Well, no, I mean the kind of progressive people who got behind him and pressed him when it was a him against Hillary, and obviously it was a much broader coalition that carried him into the White House. But, I mean, you're arguing that they should now pressure Obama.
No, I'm not arguing that they should pressure Obama, because they won't pressure Obama.
I'm talking about some of the progressive forces you're talking about who helped elect him. Are they so invested in him that they can't take him, that they're limited in how they can take him on? Are they so invested in his success?
You know, Bob, you're a little bit vague about progressive forces. I mean, I don't know who you mean.
Well, I'm talking
exactly.
about some of the unions, you know, I mean, you know.
Yeah, the unions are not, we can't rely on the unions. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I mean, okay,
He's not all of
rely on you.
He's not all of
You
labor.
can't rely on them.
We can't rely on the unions because, look at the way the unions played footsie with Clinton. They didn't really pressure Clinton. They were much more worried about getting Clinton reelected, even though getting Clinton reelected didn't do very much for working people in the United States, although it is true that George W. Bush was far worse for working people. So the progressive force, the people who are sort of in on the deal, who are working with Barack Obama now, will be very cautious. We can't rely on them.
You have to pressure him from the outside
yes,
the way it's been done historically in this
Yes.
country.
Well, I think you see a number of things that are different structurally between both labor and the American public in general that are different between now and when Clinton took place. You didn't have Walmart like you did back then, you know, and you have this whole crisis in labor, you know, where the working class has been just trounced again and again. You have, you know, annual incomes go just diving. And I think labor has so much more to worry about. It's so much more invested in getting things right this time and getting things to change and getting the National Labor Relations Board to become, you know, a tiny bit more progressive, that they can't not pressure him. I think they're between that rock and a hard place. That now that you're there, this is what, you know, you've got to show and prove, because then what have they thrown all this money and people and everything else behind them for? You know,
in order, among other things, to stop Bush 3 and stop George and stop John McCain.
Stop the hemorrhaging.
I mean, you know, countering some of these arguments is the fact that the Democratic majorities, you know, particularly in the Senate and to some degree in the House, and, you know, also in the House, is made up of the kinds of kind of blue dog Democrats that Francis was talking about. These are people who you would expect to resist some of the more left-leaning things that arguably would help a city like New York. I mean, anytime you get the larger you get the larger your majority is in American politics, the more likely you're going to have that internal tension. And in order to preserve that majority, you've got to cut deals, and deals that may not serve the interests that we think are best. Mm-hmm. So I mean,
well, you know, he's got to bring up programs that change identities. You know, he lost the white male vote, and he needs to grab more of it. How could he do that? Well, he's got to get away from these terrorism themes.
Except that no Democrat has won the white male vote since when? Since I think Jimmy Carter.
Well, this is his moment. He's got majorities in both houses. He needs to frame programs that, you know, Reagan reconstructed working class identities in the 80s, and people lost touch with their labor roots and became sort of patriots, and they became similarly. This is Obama's moment to do the same. If he doesn't, he may not win re-election.
You know, I always thought that one of the things that I'm being a Democrat and having worked for Jimmy Carter, so I followed the Reagan years rather closely. I always thought the most profound reason that the Republicans, at least on a presidential level and increasingly in Congress, held sway is because Reagan brought a lot of young people into the habit of voting for Republicans, and that when you this is really for for students sitting out here, when you get used to voting, where I grew up, your arm would fall off if you pulled that Republican lever. And now, so now you have the energizing of young people. At least for Obama, is it institutionalized? Do they continue to come out? Who knows? But if you can get them in the habit as they grow of voting for Democrats, you reverse what I think was a very powerful tool.
Well, there's two interesting statistics in the exit polls. The first was the overwhelmingly strong young voter vote for Obama. It was like 2-1, and it was the only the 18 to 29-year-old generation was the only white voting bloc that Obama carried.
Jews.
Well, I mean age
Age-wise,
group. And the other interesting fact was that among conservatives, 20% of self-professed conservatives voted for Obama. So you can interpret that in two ways. You could say, well, Obama has to tailor his policies to conservatives, kind of cut to the middle like Clinton. Or you could argue that Obama has some kind of appeal to conservatives, and maybe he's got an in, and he can lure them into a progressive agenda. Just as we used to talk about Reagan Democrats, we can talk about Obama Republicans, and that could be the basis for party transformation.
I mean, I don't mean to simplify this, but they were essentially, lured on social issues, I would argue, against their economic interest. Right. And so you have a very different...
They were also lured on racism.
And they were, I believe they were lured on the...
That's why the South...
Ronald Reagan started his campaign in 1980 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was not an accident that's where he chose to start his... to start his campaign. I agree
Race
with that.
and sex, the real devils of American political culture, going way, way back.
But lures can be positive and negative. You could lure in conservatives with a wonderful social welfare net that
well,
really
but in fact, you saw all these people, all these rednecks for Obama, because they felt that they were economically so threatened that they knew it was time for a change, and Obama was credible enough in their minds that they were able to see beyond certain biases you might expect them to act.
You're
on.
making an important point, which is that Obama, first place, Obama won because he won big, because he had a big margin. The election could not be finagled.
Right.
So that's the first point. Second point, he won big. Why did he win big? The racism has not evaporated in the United States. He won big because George W. Bush messed things up so very badly. He won big because people were sick of the Iraq War, on which we have now spent trillions of dollars, and he won big because the economy was a mess. So the very problems that you're saying Obama will make life difficult for Obama are in fact the problems which gave him the election victory. The question is whether we're going to see a period like the early New Deal, where a savior comes into office in the midst of chaos and economic depression. That's Obama, that's FDR.
That's less than true, right? I also think that he's got to pass programmatic issues that appeal to the working class American. I think he's got to make a difference in their lives with what he's advocating from the White House. I think if he's able to do that, he'll be able to activate them, keep them interested in voting for him, and keep them interested in voting in their own economic interests, and sort of reverse that Reagan trend against voting for social issues versus economic issues, and reverse that, and they'll be voting for the economic issues over the social issues, which is how we got elected in the first place.
Latino voters were very strong Hillary supporters, Clinton supporters,
right.
up until Obama basically started running the table. How quickly and you obviously focus on the Latino community more than any other community, although you obviously have broader interest. Was that an easy transfer of loyalty?
Well, I think for the most part, the other piece is that Obama was making quicker inroads with Latinos younger Latino voters, and that was happening throughout. And because Latinos experienced the Clinton years as prosperous years, because they identified with the Clinton brand, There were all these linkages, and there was very little sort of background among Latinos about who Obama was. Also, Hillary, under the Clintons, a number of Latino leaders, Federico Peña, who actually went over to the Obama campaign, a number of other leaders were appointed and had their ascendancy during the Clinton administration.
Governor Richardson.
Governor Richardson, of course, who all went over to Obama. So, I think that because of the dire straits Latinos find themselves in economically, the nation finds itself economically, that it was easy to transition into that. And he gained name recognition as a result. And he had a tremendous on-the-ground operation in battleground states like New Mexico, a tremendous field operation that, reporters that we had on the ground were saying that they hadn't seen anything like that. So, and appealing on immigration. I mean, he was during the debates with Hillary Clinton, he was very specific about not only immigration reform, but not scapegoating, not buying into this fear cycle that seems to resurrect itself every periodically. So I think it was easy for him to sway and lure Latino voters.
When you talk about scapegoating, let me stay with you for a second. It seems that McCain, and I think we ought to talk at some point about what a disaster shape the Republican Party is in. McCain tried to pull out of a lot of the old chestnuts, whether he's a socialist, he's in 2004 there was gay marriage, but they didn't seem to play that card as much. But he was a terrorist coddling, he was a Muslim, he was a socialist, he was palling around with terrorists. It seems to me that the economic implosion was so great that it kind of made that almost insulting to the average voter. I mean, it was just. I mean, they just couldn't play that tune again. I mean, people just weren't ready to listen.
People saw right through that. I think people were hurting in the pocketbook. People were, their neighbors were being foreclosed. They were being foreclosed. Their property values were growing. Their retirement fund was just evaporating. I think people, all that other stuff. It sounds good when everything's great. When things are terrible, what's terrible is what counts. And Obama is saying, look, there's hope. We can lift you up. This is going to change, and we're going to go in a different direction. I think people felt that, and they saw through the wisping and the grasping at straws that the McCain-Palin team was doing, and they had seen that same thing, like you said, again and again and again and again. And when you see it that many times, you see it for what it is, as opposed to what they want you to see it for.
So the boy cried wolf 12 times instead of just three. A couple of times, actually, it took 12 times.
Exactly. It took 12 times, but they saw it.
But it also took a very rapid unraveling of the economy. It was occurring so quickly. It was scary.
The original,
it is scary.
The original proposal for the Wall Street bailout which was basically just to bail out the banks, and not, in essence, you were in essence privatizing the gain because people were able to keep their profits and socializing or nationalizing the risk. I mean, what the Democrats at least were able to do in talking about kind of bringing some of the benefits down to people in terms of foreclosure relief is actually get it down to kind of build more to the bottom. But, I mean, I still, they say that Roosevelt saved capitalism in 8 days by doing things that might have been accused as being socialist in the past. I can't imagine I don't think I've ever seen I know I haven't seen in my lifetime a more direct government involvement in the economy than we saw under the most conservative president in my lifetime. So it's a strange.
Well, I mean, I think the reality is we have this myth of a laissez-faire, economic capitalist system, and it just doesn't exist. It's never existed. And I think we live under that myth so much that we believed it. And that, even though this huge infusion of capital was, sort of a shock, it wasn't a shock. Because people there's been corporate welfare going back, decades. And I think that the problem is it should have started at the bottom. They should have brought back the homes and not brought back the insurance on the homes or the debt on the homes. And I think that's a problem. I think when you don't
Except that if you don't, I mean, the choice that the government faces, if you don't loosen those credit markets, and banks weren't lending to other banks. I mean, it was because they didn't know if those banks would be there the next day to pay it back. If you don't, we're all hostage.
Well, you can do a combination of
those people.
You can't just bail out the banks and not bail out the American people who are paying you to bail out the banks. I mean, I think you had to do some sort of foreclosure relief. You had to keep people in their homes somehow, and I think a failure to do that is a failure overall. And I think the reality is you help people correct their credit rating, and you put money back in people's hands. They will spend that money. They will spend it quickly, and that will help the economy more than just giving banks $700 billion billion. And we see what that did with AIG. They spent the money, they didn't even spend it in the country, and they spent too much of it, And they spent it just as quickly as, the next door neighbor would.
Let me go to a question. Tell us your name, speak up, and tell us your campus, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Witter. I'm from Medgar Evers College, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. And my question is, do you think that Barack Obama, being that he has been elected President of the United States, do you think that the American people can trust both parties, the Democratic along with the Republicans, to work together with the economic crisis that we're facing in today's society?
I mean, Obama promises to do this in a bipartisan way. Can it be done?
Well, I hope they don't work together. The only way they could work together is if the Democrats agreed with the Republicans. I don't want the Democrats to agree with the Republicans. Look, you got that during the early bailout panic. Everybody voted for it.
And you got it during the Clinton years.
And you got it during the Clinton years. It's not good for the American people when Democrats are able to work with Republicans. It means that the Democrats are not being very democratic.
I think it remains to be seen. I think, you would hope that they can come. I mean, they're basically forced to do something. This question, what is they going to do and how is it going to help people? Regardless of how they work together, what are they going to achieve?
Well, I'm sorry, do you want to?
No, I think Democrats definitely need to be pushed to hold the line for working class families. I mean, we've been critical on the local level, national level of what we see is too often a caving in to Republican agenda.
But now you have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and 57 seats, 58 seats, depending this. As
some Democrats who act
this,
Republican.
Alaska has not resolved its Senate race. Georgia hasn't resolved its Senate race. Minnesota hasn't resolved its Senate race.
But the very practical problem is, there aren't any moderate Republicans left, or very few.
There are two in Maine, I think.
And so you're really grasping. You're grasping for a few remaining senators to form a budget coalition. So. On the ground, I think it's going to be hard.
I think the problem is that Democrats have been afraid to be Democrats. I think they need to get beyond that and go back to the core values of the Democratic Party, which is fighting and working for the working class people.
Well, but is it the same Democratic Party? I mean, the people who've been elected, the people. I was thinking of this guy Heath Shuler, used to be a quarterback, quite a conservative Democrat from North Carolina. You see. Democrats winning in conservative areas by tailoring a message that is a fairly conservative message. And does that work against the kind of, I mean, you're talking about an old New Deal coalition in essence, that kind of lifted this country up.
Well, the New Deal coalition, the Democrats were very conservative. There were a lot of conservative Democrats during the 1930s. Most Democrats came from the South in the 1930s. So the notion that we have to rely on the ideas, the sentiments, the values of the people that are elected in order to get a progressive set of policies is, I think, wrong. If there is enough trouble in the country, everybody shifts. In the 1930s, there was a governor of I think it was Louisiana, a guy named Bilbo.
Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi. A notorious conservative. Notorious. I mean, the guy was a fascist. But by 1933, it didn't matter. He was telling the press that people are getting, talking about revolution here in Mississippi. And he said, and I'm getting pink myself. So
he did manage to overcome that impulse,
No, that's not quite true. In the 1933, 34, 35 period, Southern conservatives were gung-ho.
Huey Long.
Were gung-ho for progressive Roosevelt policies. Why? Because they were worried about the people in their states and the rallies and the discontent. And the idea that people are talking about revolution in Mississippi.
It's very different Russia right now, although maybe not as different as we think it is. Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus.
My name is Ephraim Shimoni. I go to Brooklyn College. I just wanted to ask, being that I'm an intern at city government, city council, I've seen how the terrible effect that relying on the financial market for the great part of a revenue to be put into the budget has cost the city. What measures do you think Obama can campaign and push to changing the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure, economic of our country toward a more innovative or green-based infrastructure?
Well, that's exactly what he's been talking about. Anybody want to? I mean, he's been. In New York City, this is what's called the FIRE sectors: finance, insurance, and real estate. And we are grotesquely dependent on them, and that's where this financial crisis is in AIG and real estate. Although our real estate, at least in the city, hasn't gone down very much. But obviously the financial hit is awesome. I don't think anybody thinks we're going to be restoring the manufacturing economy we had when I was a kid.
But the GM problem will be the first test of the administration. The question is, how is it handled with a traditional bailout, with federal money coming with strings that some of it be directed toward development of sustainable technologies. So in many respects, I think you'll see the.
But also the threat of bankruptcy carries with it the presumed ability to essentially break union contracts, break the deal even on some of the retiree benefits that people have, so I mean, absent a bailout, this is a very high stakes game of chicken with a lot of people's lives in play.
I think it's a mistake to allow these sort of contracts, and this is not just me speaking because I work for a union, but I think these people's lives, they've depended on these pensions and these agreements all their lives, and that's what they've built towards. And you take that out from under them, you do a tremendous disservice both to them and their families, but a tremendous disservice to the American economy. And I think that allows the womanization of America. Now I'm 65, I got to go back to work. I can't work the same 8 hours I was working before. I'll take a part-time job at Walmart and I'll stock stuff and I'll get by on that. And I think it's terrible. I think we've got to somehow use the government's leverage to maintain those pension funds and make sure that when the company goes, it shouldn't decimate the people at the bottom first. And while these same CEOs get these multi-million-dollar, golden parachutes, platinum parachutes. I mean, it's things are topsy-turvy. I mean, you got to change it. And I think with regards to the bailout of the auto industry, I'm talking to this, to my friends about this. Like, where's my flying car? I mean, we're sending robots to Mars. We've got a telescope in orbit around the planet that can see the edge of the universe, but we can't make an SUV that gets more than 18 miles per gallon? Something's wrong with that. I mean, we should be having fuel-efficient cars. We should have electric cars everywhere. I mean, it's not technologically impossible. It's economically impossible because there's economic interest against it. I mean, you've got to break that, and now's the time to smash that.
Well, I mean, you have presumably a market-driven situation in which the market, whatever that amorphous market is,
it doesn't exist.
Won't challenge the American people.
The market is a veil.
It's not the market.
Right, it's a veil that they use to scare you. It's the boogeyman. The market is the boogeyman. Oh, the market won't let us do it.
That makes it seem democratic because all the consumers want those big SUVs that are incredibly inefficient. If that were true, we wouldn't have all those small Japanese and Korean and West German.
GM would still be the largest
and
automaker
GM would
in the
still
world.
be the largest, yeah.
No, I agree with that, but it's in terms of green development and stuff. I mean, when the questioner, he was saying that how do you restructure an economy? I don't know if you can do it on a local level. We may be too intertwined nationally and globally to do it, but that's one of the things Obama's talking about. One of the forward-looking aspects of what he's talking about. Yes, sir.
Hi. I'm Joffrey Molina. I'm a student at Brooklyn College, and my question is, with all this youth support and how much of a social impact having an African American as our president, what can the youth do to feel that they're doing their part in helping promote this theme of change that President Obama has been
Right, I mean,
President-elect Obama has been.
And let me start with you. And also following up on that, do you think the people he's talking about, which is not only African Americans, it's young people, it's Latinos, it's people who have felt some sense of empowerment through Obama that did not feel a sense of empowerment before. Is this a one-shot deal? Is this a staying power, or is that one of the tests of Obama?
It depends on what happens with the administration, but I think what you're speaking to is that there's this this sense that you know, I have a stake in this, I made this happen, I have some kind of hand in shaping the way things go. And you know, among Latinos specifically, the population skews younger, and I think that it's somewhere between 40 to 50,000 Latinos turn 18 every month. So how that energy continues, I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to keep that activism, that movement activated, because you still have a number of issues from the war in Iraq, which is what many students mobilized around. Many of young people were really concerned about immigration reform, about non-citizen students, undocumented students who would benefit under legislation like the DREAM Act, who want that opportunity. So there are plenty of ongoing issues that young people can remain involved in and activated around, and the nation, as it's historically has seen, it needs that kind of pressure, needs a sort of on the street technological mobilization, et cetera, that young people are good at.
But historically, there hasn't been a staying power, particularly among young voters. I mean, you saw this. Clinton brought in a bunch of young voters when he was elected, and I think they sort of disappeared. But I think, you know, the Democratic Party has a role to play in that, and to engaging the Democrats who voted for him, engaging, you know, non-Democrats to come into the fold. I mean, and they've been falling down on the job for if we're honest with ourselves, for a long time. I think, you know, there's got to be a mechanism by which we can engage them. There's got to be a mechanism for feedback, and I think that mechanism doesn't exist. And either they create it themselves and we latch onto it, or we create it for them. I think in what direction do we go? I mean, there are decisions to be made. It just strikes me that it's not that long ago, like 4 years ago, where you had, if you looked at the map, that red and blue map, you had the Democrats essentially being a coastal party with a little bit of support in the industrial, and that, you know, that the argument that the Republican, the Karl Rove strategy of a permanent Republican majority. Now, one election, and we're all talking about the Republicans have receded to being a regional Southern party, and they're bordering on irrelevance. I mean, it seems like we're drawing rather broad historical conclusions based on not that long history.
Well, you know, Rove called it he's saying now, he called it a durable.
Durable,
he's
yes.
backing a little bit on. Now, durable meant one election, I guess, but. Well, you know, there's a book a few years ago, The Emerging Democratic Majority, and it was 3 parts.
There was a famous book, The Emerging Republican Majority, in the 1960s.
And it worked. Right. They were right.
And it did work.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, Kevin Phillips, I think, worked.
Right. So these coalitions last about a generation, so one might anticipate a new Democratic majority if Obama does the right thing. He's got a little bit of a Hamlet complex, you know, and he sits around and contemplates his navel, and he hires a lot of Clintonites. And I think it's very worrisome if, from the perspective of a Democrat intent on passing some substantial policies and creating a coalition.
Well, it's also, I think, the case that Clinton's popularity, you know, went way up after the Republicans took the Congress, and he stopped bad things from happening as opposed to achieving a lot of stuff. So I mean, I'm a fan of the Clintons.
I think that the '92 congressional takeover was both a blessing and a curse. I mean, it was a blessing for Clinton because then you didn't have to worry about that Democratic stalemate of owning all 3 houses of government. But it was a curse because the Democrats, the big D Democrats, have never responded to the contract on America. You know, we've never rhetorically come back to that. We've never programmatically come back from that.
It was called the contract for America, but it was a contract on America.
Yeah, it depends. You know, it depends on, again, those rose-colored glasses. But I think, you know, realistically, what has been the Democratic response to that? I mean, even at the city level, it was, you know, either you're Republican or you're almost a Republican. You know, and that's what
it's called. Triangulating. I mean, it's exactly what you've been talking about with some degree of passion about not, you know, triangulating by trying to find some common ground with people when sometimes you just got to take them on.
Right, and you know, Obama doesn't want to take them on, which is part of what we're talking about. Obama talks about
because he's a constitutional lawyer, right?
A post-racial, post-partisan American political system, a post-conflict American political system. Look, it's a very divided country. Inequality has spiraled. Some people have taken advantage of most of the people. There is conflict in American society, and we've got to find ways to articulate that conflict through our political system. Obama's not going to do that willingly. He really does want to be a post-conflict president, but we've got to force his hand. And if we do, we'll make him a great president.
I mean, I think it's still, I don't know what kind of president he's going to be. I think it's still too early. I mean, it's been, what, 12 days or something like that since he's been
He's not president for 60-something days.
Right. So I think we'll see.
I also think, talking about Clinton when he came in with the full Democratic majority, as Carter did in 1976, both of them, this argues against the point that Francis is making. Both of them said we're outsiders, and they brought in outsiders who were eaten up by the government. I mean, the guy named Mac McClarty from Arkansas was Clinton's first chief of staff. Hamilton Jordan, who I knew quite well, who passed away recently, was Jimmy Carter's. And they ran as outsiders, and they tried to govern as outsiders, and they got eaten alive. And Obama is not trying to govern as an outsider. He's very much Mr. Outside, Mr. Inside. And I think that your concern, and I'm not sure it's a negative, or maybe it's balanced, maybe it's even a positive, is that he has an ability to play the inside game, to kind of play Washington at its own game. Am I making sense, or am I rambling?
No, I don't think you're making sense.
Often I don't make sense. I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, panel. My name's Sandra May Flowers from Hostess College, and the first part of my question goes to the two political professors. The original purpose of the government bailout was to buy up the toxic assets to get the economy moving again. Do you think that the bailout is a step by the government towards socializing debt and privatizing profits? And the second part of my question is to the panel. President-elect Obama recently met the Senator McCain. Do you think that Senator McCain should be considered for a cabinet post? If so, which one? If not, why not?
Would you take the first? Do you want to take the first part of that?
Yes. The bailout was an example of privatizing, risk. Yeah, and socializing cost, for sure.
Privatizing profit and risk.
Socializing the risk and privatizing the profit. Right.
Yeah.
What do you think about the fact that he's reached out to McCain? Should McCain have a role? I don't think McCain wants a role, but I mean, what does that tell you that he reaches out to McCain?
I think it's smart to reach out to him publicly. I think it helps him. He's got to govern now. He realizes that. I think to govern, you've got to bring everybody in.
You govern in prose,
right?
Mario Cuomo
Right.
said,
And I think it's smart to. And I think McCain has some good ideas. I think McCain can be an ally in certain aspects. In the Senate on certain issues, but I think I want to see him bring out the talent that we don't know and haven't seen yet. I mean, I think if he's going to pick a senator, he should do it strategically. Pick a Republican senator where you have a Democratic governor, right, to help you. But I think other than that, let the senators do what they're going to do. Let them, use them as allies, but bring the new talent, into the government, and a non-Clintonite, a non-Senate, a non-congressional talent, and let them go to work.
This sense of, I'm not sure who is disliked more by the Republicans, Obama or McCain. That's the other. That's the other question.
Good evening. My name is Joe Eastman from Hunter College. I'm just wondering if you all can talk about Obama's options with regard to tax policy and how difficult it will be for him to be able to fulfill his promises with regard to tax cuts for the middle class and repealing the Bush tax cuts, given the current economic crisis, and maybe what he needs to do in order to get those policies implemented.
Well, he has one benefit in that in 2011 the Bush tax cuts will expire absent affirmative action to expand them. So I would assume that that's not going to happen. But have you looked at this question at all?
I think it's easy. That's the easiest part of this, I think, is straightening out the tax structure and making it slightly more progressive. We'll see how far it goes.
Did the tax issue resonate in your editorial board? Have you guys? I mean, there's obviously, the tax question is essentially an equity question. What's fair? I mean, the degree to which it's classic trickle down. You give the rich people money, they're it's going to trickle down and help the poor.
Well, he sold that 95% that cut really
95% of families.
95% right. Families really hard, so he's going to have to deliver on that. But one of the issues that has not been spoken to, because there's been all this emphasis on the middle class, is working class folks, poor people, and the inequities. In 8 years, there's more poverty in this country, and that's ridiculous. This is a quote unquote advanced industrialized nation. So what's happening about living wages, about housing, around health insurance, all the kind of things that you need to line up to make sure that a family that's at the bottom can rise up. What's happening or what's going to happen around this whole cradle to prison pipeline that exists in this nation that keeps funneling young people into underfunded schools, into unemployment, and into prison. So those are some of the key questions that resonate with more of our readers and that they want to see addressed.
Her point is very important because tax cuts, even so-called middle-class tax cuts, will not do anything for the working poor or the poor. Those
Right.
people don't pay those taxes.
Except that under his tax proposal, there's a negative income tax where they will actually get some money back. I can't presume to understand the exact proposal. It's not my area of expertise.
Well, one idea you don't hear much about, which would be great, I think, would be a 6-month social security tax holiday, and that would put money in people's pockets quite directly, and it's administratively easy to do. But there hasn't been, Pat Moynihan floated that idea way back when, but it hasn't resurfaced. It's too bad.
I do think that one of the things that in terms of, I think the economic implosion has put one very bad idea to bed, which is the idea of privatizing Social Security. The very essence of the Social Security is a safety net. Was that money invested in the market? Think about older people who do, and a stunning number of older people do depend on Social Security as their sole or overwhelmingly primary source of income. And you go back to the New Deal. I mean, Social Security is the kind of mammoth government program, if you will, that has minimized, hasn't eliminated, but has minimized geriatric poverty to a degree that it's an unimaginable country without it. I mean, geriatric poverty would be grotesque in this country, absent that kind of big government program. So I think that at least those. What are the lessons? I mean, since you look at this from history, I mean, Obama looks at Roosevelt and Obama looks at Lincoln in terms of structuring. Lincoln had a different situation in that he had a war at home as opposed to a war abroad, and the argument is that for all the government programs the New Deal put forth, that it was essentially a holding action, and it was the economic stimulus of World War II coming down the pike that actually lifted the country out of the Depression.
That's true, but Roosevelt, when he took office in March of 1933, which is when
in those days, right?
You took office in those days, acted very, very rapidly to deal with the worst, most acute needs of people. He pushed through an emergency relief bill. He pushed through a farm bill, which gave some relief to farmers who weren't recovering the cost of production when they sent their stuff to market. He tried to do a National Industrial Recovery Act. It wasn't very successful, but he tried. Now, these relief programs, they were relief programs. They gave people a handout, it's true, but he had a Civilian Works Administration and then WPA. They made it possible for people to survive the disaster. And then later, in the 1937-38, when American corporations were getting war production orders from Europe, then the economy actually began to pick up and things got better as a result of markets. But for at least 5 years, Roosevelt kept people afloat with government action, government support, government jobs, government subsidies for farmers, government checks to the unemployed. And he also, in a way, soothed the nation's soul.
It's also an argument that the kinds of structures, government structures, softened a lot of the current blow of the economic implosion. Some of those same socialist government structures, if you will, and that there's a degree to which the severity of the problem was, especially in loosening, came from loosening regulations that dated back 70 years, that it actually served the country well, and were lifted as the economy got more complex. The regulatory structure in no way kept up with it. So I don't know if that's another lesson from Roosevelt.
It certainly is, I think.
Got a couple of minutes left. You talked about the war. Obama is talking about pulling troops out of Obama and putting them into Afghanistan. We in New York City, I think, probably think about this in different ways because we were the target of the attack of September 11th, which you can link to Afghanistan. There's, to me, there's a rationale to a war in Afghanistan. The people
Right.
were people focused on Iraq? Are they not focused on Afghanistan?
Well, I think with the reports about the Taliban wreaking havoc again and rising to power in Afghanistan, there was attention for a while on Afghanistan. But what we've seen is the economy take over in the news, become front and center, and we're hearing very little about Iraq and Afghanistan. But Iraq was is considered an immoral and misguided war, a huge blunder. That's misdirecting resources. We've dealt with this huge casualty toll, et cetera, and civilians being killed in Iraq. But what I don't want to see is sort of a redirecting of troops and resources, just a transplanting of that into Afghanistan, because the solution should be to stabilize and deal with national security issues in Afghanistan, but not just switch defense contractors over from Iraq to Afghanistan.
You understand making deadline, and I'm about to get the goodbye sign. I think that this is. I think that there's whatever joy we have at the election of Obama in this city. I mean, I think that we are going to be disappointed. But frankly, after the last 8 years, I'm going to enjoy the joy for a little bit of time.
Oh, it is a joyous
disappointed
moment.
next year. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on the CUNY Forum.